Tuesday. I was just about to say we will give everyone just another 30 seconds or so and we'll get started. All right. Well, again, welcome everyone to the first Toolbox Tuesday of the year. My name is Dan Martinez. I'm one of the grant managers with the Illinois Works Pre-Apprenticeship Program. For many of you, this might be your first Toolbox Tuesday. We had implemented these last year. And as opposed to our onboarding sessions, these are meant to be a much more informal, opportunity for us to, communicate, information, best practices, um, extra teaching sessions. So, these programs or these sessions are really based on feedback that we receive from grantees, sometimes in general and then sometimes individually, and the grant managers within Illinois Works talk and say, yeah, I've had a couple grantees ask about this, and another grant manager will say the same thing. So we'll put that into a Toolbox Tuesday so that we can kind of cover it in mass. So today we're going to be talking about compliance reports, very timely since all of you should have, or all of your organizations should have recently received the May compliance reports. On tap today, we'll cover those in detail, and that's really the focus of the Toolbox Tuesday. Again, these are a little bit more informal, so we definitely want you to go ahead and ask questions. If you have a question while I'm speaking, you can place it in the chat. You can try, raising your hand or sending up an emoji. If I don't catch it, I'm sure one of the other Illinois Work staff members will catch it, and we can, try to address it. What happens though sometimes in these meetings, some of the questions are very grantee specific, and so sometimes we will have to take those offline. But certainly, if we are able to, we can answer that in mass. And a lot of times, if you're having that a question, a lot of the other grantees will have the question as well. So once we're done with compliance reports, again, the focus of this meeting, if we have time, we're going to just talk about the way the grant managers run through compliance in general. And most of you, or all of you, really should already be aware of this. We wanted to make sure in April that everyone had a very good understanding of it, and for the renewal grantees were aware of any changes, additional items that we were implementing in the compliance process, or things that we had removed, of course. And then we'll talk about some of the tools and tips that we have for helping with verification as well. So starting off here, this is kind of the roadmap for compliance. So every month moving forward, we will be pulling data out of IWRS. That begins the compliance process, and really that's kind of a level set. We'll discuss it here again in a moment, but really what that means is that your overall IWRS status, and certainly you start with inquiries and then move someone to an applicant status, and then if they meet all the criteria, your first day of class, your orientation, they show up, they're then enrolled, right? And that's the first compliance status that we look at. And then they remain enrolled as they go through the training and all the the services that you're providing them until graduation. And at that point, they move to complete or complete and in transition status. And so that's the next stage, right? Then we look at completion verification. At that time, we also will look at transition verification. So it's important to know that essentially when we're pulling data, when we say, okay, we're pulling data on this date for compliance, it's that overall status that we are locking in place, and then we're moving forward with compliance from that point on. Then we move on to verifying the outcome metrics based on the data that's either typed in or uploaded to IWS. So that's where the grant managers go through and literally download every single interview sheet, download every commitment agreement. We look at every diploma, GED transcript that has been uploaded into the system, and as well as looking at every piece of data that was typed in. So that's just on the enrollment side. There's obviously much more for the completion, and we'll get into some of that. But that's the second step. The third step is then that the grant managers then in IWRS make a determination. Is this enrollment verified? Is this completion verified? Is this transition verified? And of course, there are a lot of different stages of transition verification with the primary, preliminary, primary, final, alternative construction, and secondary transitions. So we make those determinations, and then those get essentially hard-coded into IWRS. We also then in the next kind of phase, stage 4, we determine a compliance ranking based on everything we did with those verifications. If we were able to verify a completion, that goes as kind of a point toward a compliance verification. And then so we verify those based on those metrics, and then step 5, we create and send out those progress reports, the payment worksheet, the verification spreadsheet, and that's the information that we're going to really focus on, making sure people understand what they're looking at so that they're useful to them. So those are the kind of the 5 steps. We're actually going to start with step 4. We're going to do this a little bit backwards because in order to really understand what we're looking at in step 5, which again is the focus of the presentation, we're going to start with step 4 for understanding there. So step 4 is determining those metrics and ratings. And the reason I want to start with this is to make sure everyone has a strong understanding of the importance of their work plan. That will ultimately be the guide that determines your compliance score. It determines right from the beginning what your grant manager is even going to look at. So your work plan has cohort start and end dates. And that is how we determine which metrics to review. So enrollments can only be looked at as part of compliance if the program start date is prior to the compliance pull date, right? Completions can only be reviewed if the cohort end date is prior to the compliance pull date. And then transitions are reviewed based on a 2-week window. So although you can work on your participants' transitions, that you can assist them with applying to registered apprenticeship programs throughout your 8-week, 12-week, 14-week program. That needs to those transitions need to occur if they haven't already in those final 3 weeks of your cohort. And so we give grantees an additional 2 weeks after the program completion to get those documents, because this is the area that relies on third parties, right? The enrollment and completion, essentially you're in control of entering that information. That's not on enrollment. There are some third-party documents, of course, like a diploma that need to be provided, but transition are exclusively third-party documents. So we give you a little bit of time before we hold an organization to that compliance metric. And so let's take a look at what that means. Um, so when we determine an overall compliance rating, what we're looking at are not only the individuals we were able to verify for enrollment or completion or transition. This screen doesn't have transitions, but we're looking at enrollments and completions. But we also have to even determine, as I was just saying on that previous screen, you know, do the dates align with the work plan? So, for example, what we see here is a cohort 1 that has gone through enrollment and gone and ended their program, but it's still within 2 weeks of the compliance pull, so we're not looking at their transitions at that point for cohort 1. Cohort 2 has started, but it's still in progress. So we're not looking at the completions in that case, right? And you really start to see that, and this starts to make sense when you understand that we are essentially grading each metric. So we were able to verify 18 of the 20, the enrollment goal of 20. We were able to verify 18 participants, and so that results in a 90% for that metric. For completions in cohort 1, the goal was 17 individuals, and that cohort was able to, or the grant managers were able to verify that 12 of those individuals had everything necessary for a completion verification, which results in a 71%. And for cohort 2, the enrollment was a perfect 20 of 20, so 100%. So what happens is all of these are added up, and we wind up with a 261% total from those 3 compliance metrics. And then we, of course, divide it by 3 because there are 3 metrics we're taking into consideration. We are not taking into consideration cohort 1's transitions at this point, cohort 1's or cohort 2's completions, or cohort 2's transitions, right? Otherwise, we'd be dividing by 6, which would result in a much lower score. But again, according to the work plan, those metrics aren't in play yet. So any questions about that?
There are no questions in the chat.
Wonderful. I've either put everyone to sleep or it made complete sense. Either way, I'm going to take it and move forward. So, but I'll give everyone an opportunity to kind of make sure they understand it. So taking a look at this example, you feel free to answer this in the chat if you like, or go ahead and say what you think might be the answer. But based on the program dates below, which of the metrics, and again, the 3 metrics that we review are enrollment, completion, and transition, which metrics will be taken into consideration during a compliance review with a pull date of June 7th? So before I share the answer, does anyone have any questions as you try to figure out the answer on your own?
Okay, I have one person who said that enrollment of cohort 1 would be taken into consideration.
It absolutely would be, yes. And we would take into consideration enrollment for cohort 1 because we're pulling compliance on June 7th, and the program clearly had started by that date. So all of the documents, the orientation, career assessment, everything should be in IWRS by March 16th. So certainly by June 7th, we would be looking to evaluate that.
Okay, Dan, we have another participant who says enrollment, completion, and transition for cohort 1.
Yeah, so we can look at, we've already said yes to enrollment, and looking at completions, we see that the program, according to the work plan, the program end date was May 15th, which obviously is well before June 7th. So they have plenty of time to upload the first aid certification, the OSHA 10 certification, um, you know, uh, make sure all of the attendance has been entered into IWRS, the credentials, the attendance sheets have been uploaded into IWRS. So yes, we would also then walk through verification for all of the individuals that were complete for a completion verification. And then I believe they had also indicated that we should review transition for this compliance. And yes, we would also take into consideration transition documents because it has passed the 2-week grace period after the end date of the program.
Okay, so Dan, there is a question in the chat, and Roger asked, are you checking for transition only 2 weeks after a cohort ends, or do you check for this monthly?
We are only that's an excellent question. We are only looking after the cohort has ended. And there's a couple reasons for that. One, that's kind of where we've kind of selected, okay, this is where it has to be. Otherwise, your grant manager, like, there are some cohorts, these are typically the high school based ones, right? That might run 4 months or 5 months. And we would be checking every single person. So, like 40 people every month just to look in the upload. So, well, is there anything there yet? No. Is there anything there yet? No. So in order to set a single date to let grantees know, okay, this is when we are going to look for those transition documents. It's 2 weeks after the completion of their program. The other reason for that is that it wouldn't actually provide a benefit until then, because you cannot receive a transition credit until the person has completed, until we've done a completion verification. Similarly, you cannot receive a completion verification unless you have an enrollment verification. So, I said, I know I said that we would save, the verification process to kind of the end as bonus material, but to put that into perspective, or to put it, in a way that kind of makes a lot of sense. Let's say this cohort 1, a person started on March 15th, but the document they provided as a high school diploma turns out it wasn't valid for whatever reason, right? Maybe they provided a college diploma instead, or sometimes we get a certification for a different program that somebody attended and completed. So in April during compliance, Illinois Works, might have said, okay, this is not acceptable. Or I guess during the May compliance, right? We would have said, no, this doesn't meet the criteria, so we can't provide an enrollment credit yet. And then the person stays in the program and quote unquote finishes the program and has all the documentation necessary for finishing. They got their first aid card, they got their OSHA 10 certification, they did everything they needed to for NCCR Core or whatever program that the grantee was providing them. But they still don't have that proof of high school diploma. Well, even though all of the metrics for completion have been satisfied, the grantee cannot receive completion credit. And that individual cannot receive Illinois Works pre-apprenticeship program verification credit to be bid credit eligible for their contractor, or to satisfy the Illinois Works Apprenticeship Initiative requirements for working on state projects until they have satisfied the enrollment requirement. And if they can never satisfy that, then none of those things will ever happen. So again, you have to be verified enrollment before we can verify you the completion, and we have to verify the completion before we can verify the transition.
So then a couple of more questions in the chat.
All right.
So Roger asked, if my cohort ends on July 31st, do I have to transition participants by August 14th, or can they be an ongoing process based on the participant needs?
So Rogers has a lot of really good questions here. Thank you. I appreciate these because these are, I think, helpful for everyone. So one of the features of the Illinois Works Pre-Apprenticeship Program is that you can continue to work with your participants to transition them for months and potentially for years later after they've completed the program, and still receive credit. So that's it's a little bit more than what we're going to jump into right now in terms of those carryover credits, but that is all explained in the grantee manual. But suffice to say that yes, if somebody graduates from your program in July and you help them transition in October, then you will receive the financial credit and the compliance credit, and your score will improve, your rating will improve, and your organization will receive that reimbursement maximum credit financially for that individual. So that's a pretty straightforward, easy one. I will say this though, that in terms of the initial work with your participants in terms of transitioning, there is no substitute for doing that while your program is ongoing. Because one of the features of workforce since the beginning of time is that participants are willing and able to do what they need to do and provide you with the feedback and that paperwork. Oh, you need proof that I'm employed? Here it is. You need proof that I applied to a registered apprenticeship program or was accepted? Here it is. Very willing to do that while they're in your program. Once they leave your doors because they've graduated, getting that information is very difficult. And sometimes they just stop answering their phone. They loved you while they were in your program. They don't know you once they graduate. So that's the challenge there. But yes, and some organizations, if you work with them and build that that trust and that relationship, then it won't be an issue. But it's just a feature of workforce, right? That the more you can do while they're in your building, the better off you are.
Okay, so then one last question here, and I'm typing the answer to Katie's question in the chat as we speak. But she asked, if a participant withdraws from the program after the second week, where is this entered in IWRS? And so I believe the correct answer is that you would simply go into the participant profile and add a new enrollment status of
Incomplete.
incomplete. Yes.
Yep. Yeah. So I think it's actually in the program completion and follow-up tab that you do that. I think that's where it's one of the two places. I think it's in the second one, but either way, you're right, Monica, that you would then go and change their overall status to incomplete. That is still enrollment eligible. So, for example, if you had a cohort that started, let's say we pulled compliance, I think on May 10th. Let's say you had a cohort that started on May 13th, and by May 17th, the person had dropped out, and now you've moved them to incomplete. When we run compliance for June, again, we didn't catch this in May because your cohort hadn't started yet. When we run compliance on June 7th, we will pull everyone that's in an enrolled status, And we actually pull everyone that's in an incomplete status because we didn't have a chance yet to see them as enrollees. But we understand that incomplete is a formerly enrolled status, right? Does that make sense? So we will catch them, and you will receive enrollment verification credit, pending the verification, for people that are in enrolled or in incomplete status. Now there is not to again, I can't. This is way off of the scope, but there are other things that you need to do to kind of put a bow on that individual that has withdrawn from the program. Starting with providing an exit interview, but also just finalizing some of the data in IWRS. But that's we look at that very heavily during closeout. For the incompletes and all the open-ended data, we don't look at that on a monthly basis, but that is definitely something that you should do, in real time, and we thoroughly review it during closeout. All right, any other questions?
That's it for now.
Okay, perfect. All right, so we had gone through this, and we had said yes, based on a compliance pull date of June 7th. It's really cohort 1 that is in play, and all of the dates, the enrollment, the completion, and the transition dates are all impacted. So we would say yes, those are the correct answers. So we'll do this again, maybe a little bit quicker on this one, but compliance will be pulled on June 7th. So this time, which metrics will be taken into consideration for that compliance review? So I'll give everyone a moment to think about it.
Okay, we have an answer of enrollment.
For which cohort, of course, we always have to, keep in mind that the metrics are on a per cohort basis. So I see Johnny, I do see the chat. Johnny has said enrollment for cohort 1 and 2.
2.
Carrie has expanded on that and indicated that we'd look at completion and transition for cohort 1 as well as the enrollments. So, yep, that is correct. It would be enrollment, completion, and transition for cohort 1 and enrollment for cohort 2. So again, each of those individually gets its own compliance score based on the goal for that metric. And then we add those up and we will divide it by the total number of metrics. So in this case, it would be 4 metrics that we would be reviewing. So again, it all starts with that work plan. So if your work plan dates, if you're looking to change those have to be pre-approved. And for many reasons, but one is it can be very impactful to a compliance score, and we are not allowed to postpone a cohort work plan date reviewing in compliance just because it would cause a rating to decrease, right? So coming back to this, let's say this organization does not have all of their enrollment data entered into IWRS for cohort 2 yet. So they can't say, well, can we just move our work plan date so we only review 3 activities? Because otherwise we're going to get a goose egg on that enrollment for cohort 2. Unfortunately, we can't, right? So, cohorts need to be, work plan dates need to be pre-approved. There's also, issues with overlapping, and then there's, of course, the needing to complete by a certain date. That all gets taken into consideration. So if you are interested in changing your work plan dates, make sure you talk to your grant manager about that and get pre-approval. But that's how we start compliance. We have to look at your work plan in order to start compliance. So once we do that and do all those verifications, as I was just talking about, we then generate a compliance percentage for each goal, And we also look at the finances for each goal. So here is the monthly compliance, an example monthly compliance report. And I'll highlight a couple of things here. First off, it will have the date, so these are monthly compliances, and it's important to know what month you're looking at. It'll have your organization name, of course, but then also that percentage and the progress. So the grantee manual does it provides the scale. I think it's 0 to 50% is poor progress, 50 to 70%. I think these might not be exact. 50 to 70% is inadequate progress, 70 to 100% is good progress, and then over 100% is excellent progress. So that's the scale, and again, that's in the grantee manual. But it really drives off of the actual percentage, and that percentage is just determined by the goals for each metric, and what was actually verified. Now, in this case, this chart is showing just the recently verified participants. So a program, essentially what I'm saying is that the numbers you see here will not necessarily be all of the numbers that go into here, because again, this was the May report. But maybe nothing changes for June. So in June, these would be zeros. The actuals, these would become zeros, but your compliance score wouldn't change because the weighting and the metrics didn't change. But again, so the point I'm making is that this table here is just showing the information that is new this month. And so new this month, this Chicago test provider, we were able to verify 13 individuals for enrollment. This is their funding levels per participant allotments for each metric. $2,750 for enrollments, $3,837.21 for completions. And then, as I mentioned, transitions get kind of complicated because these are all they're all over the place. But the point is that we very simply for each month we say, okay, well, how many new enrollments did we verify? Multiply that by the per participant allotment, and that's how you get to your new reimbursement maximum amount. All right. So this cohort for this month alone was responsible for an additional $35,750 of reimbursement eligibility. Cohort 2 is responsible for $60,500 of reimbursement eligibility. So any questions about this table?
I don't see any questions.
Okay. So it's important to, keep in mind the fine print. It says here that this table does not reflect total enrollments. It's simply the number of, enrollment completion and transition verifications for that month, something I had already kind of explained and laid out. It does state that where we received, or, how we kind of formally how we came to this information, and it was based off of a data pull of May 10th, and it's all set based on the grantee manual and the programmatic monitoring that is laid out in there. So if we look at the second page of this compliance report, we see some additional information. So let me go back to the first page. So we can see those reimbursement maximums of $35,750 and $60,500. That's what, 30 or 96,000 and change. If we go to the second page, we see that they're actually receiving much more than that 96,000. And right away we see why, because it includes their 2023 closeout funding. So for those of you that are new, you would not have a 2023 closeout. This is only for organizations that participated in the Illinois Works Peer Apprenticeship Program last year. As I mentioned, I had mentioned it when I was talking about finalizing data for incomplete individuals. At the end of the year, we go through a very thorough data verification to make sure that all of the data entered into IWRS is kind of how it should be. So, just as a really simple explanation, we talked about the different overall statuses, right? Inquiries, applicants, enrollees, and completers. Well, at the end of this year, you shouldn't have anyone still in an enrolled status, right? I mean, either they completed or they dropped out or something, right? So we would just make sure that you don't have anyone still in IWRS that's listed as enrolled, because the cohort is over. They can't. If for their training services, right, it wouldn't still say on track or planned and not started. Again, what happened? Did they complete? Then it should be listed as successful completion. Did they drop out? Well, then it's listed as a unsuccessful completion, right? So that's what closeout is. And there's a 10% of the funding is tied to that. A little bit less if you receive an advance, because that's where some of the advance gets pulled out of. But that's again, advances are only for brand new organizations that had requested it. But so for returning organizations, they don't have an advance, so they receive the full closeout amount, or are eligible, I should say, for the full closeout amount. And that is reported right there. So this organization had a perfect closeout. They're receiving $37,500 for their closeout. And that gets added to what we saw on the first page. And so that's why that's what they're seeing for their current review. So this being the first one for 2024, it also coincides with the maximum for 2024 because there wasn't anything in a prior review. But again, this organization operated as a grantee last year. So now we're looking at their total reimbursement eligibility to date. So it's essentially what they received during compliance reviews last year, plus what they just received this month, and that's the total. Any questions before I continue?
No questions.
Perfect. Again, the other sections of this are pretty self-explanatory. We have carryover credits. That was what to Roger's question, an organization that worked with an individual in 2023 and now they're operating in 2024. Maybe that person went through, they completed, but they never transitioned, and that organization is still working with that individual. And, just last month, they were able to help them get, enrolled into carpenters. Well, they can receive now their primary transition carryover credit for that individual. And so that would then all go toward their reimbursement maximums. These are for adjustments, things that might need to be corrected in one way or another. Then we look at the notes. Again, here we're just saying these are the number of metrics that we are reviewing in this compliance. So again, that's what those exercises we just went through, right? The work plan and all that. We're restating it here so that everyone's on the same page. And then if there were any issues with IWRS and things that we noticed during compliance that we need to flag for the grantee to correct, we would put them there. All right, so that's everything for this. Oh, it also mentions the next compliance pull date. It will be right here on your each compliance report, progress report.
Dan, we don't have any questions, but if you go back to the last slide, I think it's worth pointing out that your carryover amounts and the adjustment amounts may be different from your current amounts because they would have been earned at the rate of 2023 or 2022 when it was actually earned?
Yeah, yeah, that's a great point, and we're actually we'll see that on the next slide. So to Monica's point, it's like she knows what I was about to talk
Oh, great
about.
scheme. Okay.
um, so here, these tables, um, most of the information in here does not change. The only thing that changes is this and this. So, but let's focus on the things that do not change for right now. Um, we'll start with understanding metric goals, right? Because again, that's how we determine a percentage. Um, and in this case, this particular grantee, this pretend grantee, did not have anything changing from one year to the next, right? Their goal was to enroll 40 people last year. Their goal is to enroll 40 people this year. Um, one thing I like to point out to folks is that the enrollment goal sets everything else. For the most part, grantees are eligible for a certain amount of money for their grant based on the number that they enroll. So the maximum in 2023 was $10,000 per person that they enroll. So if they're for the goal, so the grant itself was written at $400,000 in this pretend situation, right? Based on that 40. Um, the grant, this pretend grant has an additional 440,000 this year because this year the per participant allotment went up to $11,000, right? So that essentially triggered how much the grant is worth. So by determining you were going to serve 40 people last year, that's $400,000. 40 people this year, $440,000. So that's how it comes to a grant award amount of $840,000. That's the total potential for the grant, right? Now, as we know, the whole point of this is that this is a performance-based grant. So even if you have eligible expenses, you can't unlock that money until you go through compliance and receive a reimbursement maximum, right? So, looking at continuing to look at the individuals enrolled, um, that determines how many you're going to complete and how many you're going to transition. So, you know, by rule, it's 85% of the enrollments you need to complete. So that's where they get this 34. And 70% of the enrollments you need to transition. And so that's how we get this 28. And now secondary transitions, strictly speaking, are not part of your like required grant agreement. That's, we stress this all the time. The purpose of the Illinois Works Pre-Apprenticeship Program is to move individuals to registered apprenticeship programs, to have them 5 years from now be journey level tradespeople. Secondary transitions don't get that. So that's why it's not a foundational metric that we review. But it is worth something financially to you, and it's worth it to the participants. So even if you have individuals go through your program, and again there's 34, and you have 28 that decide, yes, I want to go into a registered apprenticeship program, this is perfect, and you help them do that. Well, there are still 6 people that graduated, but maybe they determined that this wasn't for them for whatever reason. Maybe the circumstances in their, personal life changed and they just can't. Or maybe after going through it and getting hands-on experience, they realize that this is not what they want to do. They thought it was, but it's not. Well, those 6 people still need help, right? They were looking for careers. So you can still help them find that. It doesn't go towards your compliance score and your compliance rating, but it is worth something financially. So in most respects, you should transition everyone you graduate, right? And now again, these aren't a requirement, but they're worth something to you financially. And speaking of what things are worth financially, let's stick with 2024 and look how that all rolls out. So again, this is a $440,000 grant, and that means that enrollment funding is worth 25% of that $440,000, or $110,000. We break that into a per participant allotment. So we divide it by the 40 of the goal. And so we see that each verified enrollment is worth $2,750. And that's the same thing we saw in that very first table of the progress report. For completions, that's worth 30% of the $440,000 for the 2024 grant year. So 132,000, and we divide that by the 34 individuals, the goal of completion, and we get $3,882.35. I will point out again, last year the goal was the same, but because it was based on a $400,000 total grant, the completion funding amount was a little bit less. So when you divided that by the same number, 34, you wind up with a slightly smaller carryover credit. So anyone that went through your program but didn't quite finish last year and finishes this year, they're still only eligible for the amount that they would have received, that you would have received last year, right? So we kind of keep that in place. Whenever they started, that's them per participant allotment that they are focused under. Again, walking through it, your primary transition is worth 35%. So transition, it's worth the most amount of money. Again, that's the focus, right? So 35% of that $440,000 is $154,000. But with transitions, we break it up into all sorts of ways. So primary transitions, that's applying to a registered apprenticeship program. That when you break that all down, divide it by 28 and then take 75% of it, you're left with $4,125. If they actually wind up getting accepted and enroll into a registered apprenticeship program, then they receive the final 25%, which is an additional $1,375 of reimbursement eligibility. Alternatively, if they don't go into a registered apprenticeship program and instead decide to go into one of these other two, I'll start with secondary. Again, that's just finding a general job, helping them find a different career, a different job, maybe going to college, whether it's a university, community college, maybe going into a different kind of apprenticeship type program, maybe for nursing or for something else. That is worth, again, that doesn't give you compliance credit. It doesn't add to your compliance score, but it's worth, these 6 individuals are, would still be worth $2,750 of funding eligibility. And new this year is the alternative construction funding. And that's worth 70% of the possible per participant allotment for transitions, and so that's worth $3,850. And that again is transitioning to construction related, like going into a ComEd program or all the different solar opportunities that are available. There's more information on that in the grantee manual, of course. This highlights how much last year they had received during their compliances for last year. So this number doesn't change. It's now fixed. That's what they received last year. Again, if they have individuals from 2023 that they have new information on, they didn't have anything on them, and now they have their verification of employment, you can still receive secondary credit for that person, but that will go, instead of the 2023 reimbursement maximum, that will be part of your 2024 reimbursement maximum. So any questions about these initial tables on the payment worksheet?
There's nothing in the chat.
Is anyone still connected?
I still see Melanie. So,
All right, well, good. All right, we haven't lost everyone yet. All right, so again, these things don't change, but what does change, and this really, to me, if I were a grantee, I would focus more on this than the progress report. And because this is really showing me the aggregate, right? As you go through month by month, it's going to total up here. Um, every enrollment verification, every completion verification, and it's going to give me totals for my entire um, program, as opposed to that progress report, which again, can't stress it enough, that initial table that we look at, that is only what's new that month. So this is the aggregate report. That is the monthly report. And this focuses a little bit more on it only reports the reimbursement eligibility. It doesn't break things down into a percentage, but you can see that on your own when you see, okay, we have 35 individuals, that are, um, have verified enrollment, and go looking at the top of the, um, spreadsheet, we know the enrollment goal overall is 40. So in a lot of cases, you're more interested in how it breaks down for your entire program than on a per cohort basis, but the result is the same. So going back to this then totals up across, right? Any verifications that we've done. It includes that closeout money for the renewal grantee, and then you wind up with the total reimbursement maximum for the year, but then also your running total for your grant to date. Because remember this, because this individual or this organization was a renewal, their overall grant is worth $840,000, and so far they've unlocked $433,750. So they still have a ways to go before they kind of hit the ceiling of their grant. Any questions about this payment worksheet?
no, no questions.
Okay, perfect. So the last, I was going to share for new grantees. That's right. I kind of run through this again. So this would be an example for a new grantee, right? They probably only have started one cohort, so we don't have the second cohort even listed here yet. Or maybe they're a new grantee that's only running one cohort. Either way. So we can see that I wanted to highlight here that even though they are only at 60%, which is inadequate progress, they can still receive funding, right? They could have, they could have forgotten to upload every single diploma except for one, and this could have just been only one person verified. Well, we would have still said, okay, well, you're eligible for $2,750, even though you're at that point their rating would have probably been down to 3% or something, and they'd have been in poor progress. So being in poor progress or inadequate progress does not deny funding, but it obviously is a reflection of the fact that your organization has not tapped into all of the funding that they were expected to. Any questions about that point?
Nope.
All right, nice. Again, I highlighted this to show as an example, this is a first year grantee, so they wouldn't have any closeout information. None of this would apply to them either because they're not a renewed grantee. And the amounts here will, in this case, will all be the same, and these will always be the same because they're only a 2024 grantee so far. So the total for 2024 and their total for the grant to date will always be the same. And then finally, notice that there are some flags that were provided to this particular grantee because they had significant issues that are preventing them from not only achieving a high compliance rating, but also from unlocking their reimbursement eligibility. All right. And then the same grantee, as a new one, they don't have quite as much information on um, the payment worksheet. There isn't a carryover section. There isn't a previous year goals. It's all just pretty straightforward. It all works exactly the same way though. And on the next page, it's virtually identical, except they don't have a closeout column. In this case, they would have an advance column. Now, advances are not put into the total available funding. So what I want to highlight there is this grantee did receive an advance of $44,000 based on a $550,000 grant award. You'll notice that their closeout then is reduced and only worth $11,000 instead of $55,000. But the other point I was making was that this this $44,000 does not get reflected in. Ooh, my mouse is a little too sensitive. Does not get reflected in their total funding available. Right. This is what you've earned so far on a performance basis. This grantee has not earned their advance. They received their advance, but strictly speaking, they have not earned it yet. So if this grantee were to stop right here, right? If they haven't been paid out any of this $41,000, they would still owe the state $3,750 because they had received 44. Now, let's say they had already been paid out based on receipts they submitted, this $41,250, and they stop right here and don't go any further, and the program implodes. Well, they're going to owe the state the $44,000 advance they received, because you don't actually earn that advance until the very end, until you close out your grant. So it just basically gets pushed all the way to the end. But that's to your benefit, right? To a grantee's benefit. It provides them with additional funding. All right, the last portion of the compliance reports is the verification spreadsheet. And in a lot of cases, this is the most important. The other things just inform you, right? They inform you in ways which hopefully you can leverage that information to do better. But even if you never saw those, everything would move forward on its own. But if you never look at this, you are stopping the process in its tracks, because this is where the grant managers have gone through. Again, we've downloaded every single diploma that was in that system. We've downloaded every interview sheet, added up every score that you added up, and determined whether or not you added to 40 correctly. And then did you add the 2 interviewer scores correctly and average them out and enter that into IWRS correctly. So we've done that for every single one. And we put that right here in the needed for verification. So none of these individuals, remember that last grantee I think we were looking at, could receive $2,750 of reimbursement eligibility for every individual that we verify on enrollment. Well, we didn't verify a single one. So they're not eligible for any funding reimbursements yet. And it's because of this column here, right? So we don't just say, nope, denied, we couldn't verify it. We actually tell you why we couldn't verify it. And so these are all common mistakes that were made on enrollment alone. And so, we want to make sure that that you look at these on a monthly basis and fix these before the next compliance poll, so that we can then verify those individuals. That will increase your compliance scoring, increase your compliance rating, and provide that funding reimbursement eligibility. Small note on that compliance rating and score. Those aren't just those aren't meaningless scores. If you receive a poor progress rating for so many months in a row, you will be put on a watch list and then corrective action plan, and then you may be put on probation, and then your grant may be stopped. You'll be prevented possibly from starting a second cohort, and very likely that grantee would not be allowed to renew for a second year. Your renewals, for those of you that are not in your final year of the renewal process, instead of going through the NOFO every year, you're allowed to simply perform well and then be offered the opportunity to renew. And that's done through your compliance score. So I just want to take a moment to highlight how important those compliance scores are. Everyone gets the financial aspect of it, but those compliance scores are extremely meaningful as well. All right. I think that was it for the compliance reporting. And as I had thought, that would take the majority of the time. So we don't really have time for bonus material. I will kind of fast forward, though, to just some of our compliance tips. If I can go to that. No, I have to cycle through the whole thing. So here are the compliance tips. Again, make sure your work plan dates are always up to date, that you're aware of them, that the grant manager has approved them. If you're looking to change, that has to be done on a pre-approval basis. Prior to your compliance pull, make sure you're double checking all that information. I always say if Illinois Works, if the grant manager is your data verification system, it's not going to go well, right? We can't be the only person looking at this, and it can't be the person entering the data either, right? It has to be a second person that with fresh eyes looking and saying, hey, why isn't there a date on any of these signatures? Or I just looked at the commitment agreement and it's the person's diploma. So catch those mistakes before compliance. If time is of the essence, go person by person. What that means is that there are about almost 10 things that are required for an enrollment verification, right? There's the orientation career assessment has to be entered. The wraparound service assessment has to be entered. The diploma has to be updated. The application needs to be completed. It has to verify that the person's over the age of 17 and that they're an Illinois resident, all those things. Well, if you have 20 people in your cohort and you do all of them halfway, well, then you're still getting a 0 on that compliance. But if you do 10 of them completely, well, now you're going to get 10 verifications, right? Even though you have nothing done for the other 10. So that's what we mean by go person by person, not task by task. And that will help, if time is of the essence. But hopefully it doesn't come to that, and everything is being entered in what we call real time. With regard to that, develop and follow a data management plan, right? So that it doesn't come to that time is of the essence, where like you should have been entering those diplomas in, the first week of orientation, or I'm sorry, the first week of the cohort, not, the week before the compliance pull. And then, of course, ask your grant manager if you have any questions. And I'll leave it up on this screen as we take our final questions because I know we're out of time. These are the upcoming compliance pull dates. One word about that, a lot of times we get asked, well, when do you pull compliance? Is it 8:30 a.m.? Is it 10 a.m.? Is it noon? Is it 5 p.m.? So what I always tell people is that assume it's midnight the day before, right? So essentially, if we're pulling compliance on the 7th, you should have everything that you're going to enter into IWRS needs to be entered by midnight on the 6th. So September 6th, if we're pulling compliance, midnight on September 5th is when you should have everything entered. If we're parsing it down to what time on the June 7th, we're pulling, we're running a little bit too close. That being said, we do typically pull compliance around 10 a.m., but I really strongly urge you not to use that as a guide, because if programmatically we have something that comes up and we have to pull it early, then we're going to pull it early. It's the day before is when you're required to have all the information in. Okay. So what questions do we have as we wrap up?
All right, there are a couple of data entry questions. So Katie asked, what are the start and completion dates for the stipend entry in IWRS? And I believe that the start and completion dates are the same as your dates of instruction, correct?
Right. Um, and then in terms of when we evaluate them, we are looking at that as part of completion verification. We'll look to make sure all those stipends have been entered. But again, the guidance in the grantee manual is to enter things in real time, right? So obviously that doesn't mean as you're handing the stipend check to somebody, you're also typing it in. But the next business day, those things should be entered into the system. So if you're processing stipends on a biweekly basis, then 6 weeks into the cohort, there should be 3 stipend entries, right? It can't just wait to completion for a 12-week cohort to enter in all 6 stipend entries. But yes, we look at them at the end of the when we verify completion.
Okay, I'm going to ask one more data entry question, and then Gail, I'll jump to your question. So Katie's follow-up question is, how do you enter participant attendance without a test score? And I'm not sure I completely understand the question. So
So I
Katie, if you
think,
need to, go ahead.
yeah, Katie, if you want to expand, I think that might be related to um the bulk attendance, which we're
So
actually
when
going to be adding
so
in
when
a
you
space to do the test score, or is it something else?
right, so when you were entering, you're in the participants file and you're entering that module that's completed because and then when you enter there, it's one course like intro to construction. There wasn't a test associated with it, but under the training, it won't let me move forward without a number, but it wasn't a test for intro. Um, or whatever the module was. I'm just giving an example. So,
Right. Well, so you're going to need to talk to your grant manager about that, because all training modules are required to have a post assessment. So that's why IWRS is requiring it.
okay. Okay.
Okay. So Gail's question is, what does average score shown in the system mean? And I'm assuming you're speaking to IWRS, Gail?
Are you talking about the interviewer score, the average interviewer score?
Yeah, well, it's on the sheet. Well, I don't mind people knowing. One of our students was not allowed, enrollment wasn't complete. We've been looking at it. We don't see where the issue is, but that's the example of the issue that was given.
So yeah, I would say, email your grant manager directly about that. But I guess if it's the interviewer sheet, right? So if one interviewer gave the person a 40 and the other interviewer gave the person a 38, the average score is a 39. And that's what needs to be entered into IWRS. A
All
lot
right.
of times, we either see like a 98.5%. We're not looking for a percentage. We want the average of the 2 scores.
Okay.
And then Dan, just the last question was regarding making stipend entries. And Roger asked if we upload them into file uploads, or is there a different way to upload them? So for everyone, stipend payments are included as a goal in the career plan this year. So that's where your stipend payments would be entered.
Yep. I think actually I have an email I was going to send to you, Roger, but for everyone, in the IWRS session 3 onboarding, at about the 2 hour mark, I review how to enter stipends in IWRS. So if anyone had a question about that, they can also go. That's on all of our training onboarding sessions are recorded and placed into the partner guide, so you can feel free to go back and take a look at those. All right, I'm going to switch this over to Jeff, and please stay with us. I think there's 20 of us on here. Please stay with us and go through our evaluation. They're extremely important to us. Like I said, we operate these based on your feedback. These are the informal trainings that are really just for you, that things that grantees have said they are looking for more information on. So Jeff, I'll let you take over there, and thank you everyone for your time today, but please stick with us while Jeff walks us through Mentimeter.
Yep, thanks, Dan. If you would go ahead and go to the Mentimeter slide. And right now we are posting a link to, we're going to have a link to the chat in here, how to get to Mentimeter. Those who've been with Illinois Works know that we use this tool as a way to collect your feedback. So go to menti.com. You could go on your phone or on your desktop, laptop, wherever you are, and then enter in the code 56198143. And Monica has added that into chat. You can just directly link right out. Again, menti.com, and then you enter in the code 56198143. And we really want to collect your feedback on these Toolbox Tuesdays and the great work that Dan and Monica have put into today's presentation for us. So would love to have you. And I can see people already coming out there to our menti.com. So I'm going to switch out and share my screen. All right. So right now you should be able to see my screen and the feedback. And we're getting a few more out there. Again, menti.com, then key in the code 56198143. Monica's placed that in chat. We've got 6 of you, and there's 20 online. So let's get a few more in. Again, we love to get your feedback. It really helps us look at how we can improve. So I'm going to go to this next question. And it's the very first one here. Please share your views on this training by rating the following statements: 1, the lowest, to 10, the highest. Realizing that the numbers may not be in order, but again, 1 is the lowest, 10 is the highest. Select the response that would help represent your feedback, okay? How do you rate your views on this training? 1 to 10. I've gotten a few here coming in. Keep giving us your thoughts here. Great. We're seeing some good feedback. To what extent did it meet your expectations? We can round a 9. How likely are you to attend the similar event in the future? 9. And how likely are you to recommend this training to others? Again, a 9. Great. Thank you. We've got 10 responses. Awesome. Let's move on to the next question. The course was relevant to what I wanted to learn about this subject matter. So on a scale of, again, 1 to 5, just realize that again, 5 is the numbers may not all fully align, but you're going from strongly agree to strongly disagree. Please go through and check, make sure you're looking which one you're selecting, not just what's in order. And we'll get some feedback here. Good. We're getting some good responses. Great. Got 8 people responding so far. Strongly agree to somewhat agree. That is helpful feedback for us. Great. We're glad to hear this hit the mark. I plan to apply what I learned. So from what you got out of today, are you going to take it and put it into application? You feel you can do that? Again, strongly agree to strongly disagree. Give us your feedback. Thank you. Got a 5, 7 responses, all in, coming strongly agree. Excellent. 10 responses, strongly agree. Great. Excellent. Glad to hear that's helpful. And then what improvements might you have or recommend? These Toolbox Tuesdays are going to go on. There's more coming up, and would love to get your thoughts on improvements you might recommend for this compliance discussion, or Just overall, what improvements might you recommend for Toolbox Tuesdays? This one is a type in your response. You can just enter in NA if you don't have any thoughts, but if you have an idea, would love to get your comments in here. This helps those that will be presenting know how they can best meet your needs. We're trying to figure out what works best for you. A lot coming in, none at this time. All right. I'm going to go ahead and move forward. What did you find effective? If we make changes, what would you recommend we keep to these Toolbox Tuesdays, to this session? What would you recommend we keep? And what did you find effective? Again, NA is fine, but if you have something that really stood out to you that Dan covered, a point or a topic that was especially helpful, would love to hear that. All of it. Wow, that's great. Great feedback. Dan and Monica, thanks again. It looks like this is really hitting the mark. Great. Allowing to unmute and ask questions, interactive examples relevant to what's currently happening. Awesome. Thank you. Appreciated the examples with the numbers. I know that takes time, but great work on that. And then, is there anything else about this course that you think we should know? Just any last comments? Again, you can put NA, or if you have a specific comment, anything you want to share with us, we'd love to hear it. We always like critical feedback too, any ways we can continue to improve, so don't hesitate from that. Again, we really want to get your feedback, as our goal is to help you be successful, and we appreciate your partnership with us. Getting a few responses in here. NA, nothing. Maybe start a little bit earlier in the year for new partners. Great feedback. Need a lot more time for meeting as we went over a bit, so maybe look at our timing frame and content. Great presentation. Start sooner. Great. Well, thank you all for your time. And Dan, I think you've got maybe one more slide there at the end, if you would. And wow, thank you for that. The team's doing a fantastic job.
All right. Well, I'm no longer listed as a presenter, so I cannot share
Okay.
the screen. But again, we want to thank everyone, for attending and sticking with us. I do apologize, for running a little bit long. But again, this is meant to be informal. Sorry if I didn't make it clear that you could unmute, but we did want to, make sure we address any questions. So the next Toolbox Tuesday, if I'm presenting it, just keep in mind you can definitely unmute and ask questions, live if you need to. So thank you, everyone. I will stay on for another couple of minutes if you have any additional questions. Otherwise, we look forward to seeing you next time. Have a good rest of your day.
Bye, everyone.
I just have a really quick question. If there's a participant that has withdrawn, and do I have to go back in and enter for each module that it's 0, 0, 0, 0, or do I just proceed to the training module and put them in the incomplete status? I just need clarification on that.
Yeah, you will ultimately need to, move each of their training modules to unsuccessful completion that they did not successfully complete. Super quick background on that is that the participant is, and this does happen, they wind up in some cases either returning to your program and joining a different cohort, even in a different year, or joining a different organization's program, and they can receive credit for the time that they already spent and the courses that they did successfully complete. So that's why we do need each one of those properly, what we call, put into a final status.
Oh, that makes sense. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Right. No other questions? Bye-bye, Suzette. Thank you. All right. Bye-bye,
All
everyone.
right. Good night. Bye.